When the lawyer slid that final envelope across the table, my brother laughed so hard he nearly spilled his coffee. "I guess Dad finally realized who the real man of the family is," he said, his grin wide and smug. I remember just sitting there, staring at that thin white envelope with my name on it, my fingers trembling. I didn't even open it right away. I could already tell by the way everyone in the room was looking at me, pity in their eyes, like I'd just been handed the short straw in life. My brother Mark had gotten Dad's business, the heart of our family legacy, the thing our father had spent 35 years building from scratch. Me? I got the old house, the one that leaned slightly to the left, the one with the creaky floors and a chimney that hadn't been cleaned in years. The house everyone said should have been torn down years ago. I didn't laugh. I just sat there, listening to Mark's laughter echo through that cold office. If only he knew what that old house really held. Dad's funeral had been small, quiet, like the man himself. He was never one for big crowds or grand gestures. He built his success through grit and long nights, not through charm. Mark and I had never been close. He was the kind of man who walked into a room and made sure everyone knew he was there. Expensive suits, strong handshake, loud opinions. He was Dad's pride and joy, the one who took over the company when Dad's health started to decline. And me? I was the quiet one. The artist, the dreamer, the son who never quite fit the mold. When Mom died years before, it was me who stayed with Dad in that old house for months, helping him walk again after his heart surgery. Mark was too busy expanding the company, hosting clients, and taking photos with new investors. But I never minded. Dad and I had an understanding. We didn't say much, but we shared the kind of silence that said everything. Sometimes we'd sit on the porch at dusk, the sky streaked in orange and gold, sipping coffee. That had gone lukewarm hours ago. He'd tell me stories about how the company started in a one-room office, about the nights he almost gave up, and about how proud he was that we both found our own ways in life. He never said who he thought deserved what. The day of the will reading felt surreal. The lawyer, Mr. Hargrove, was an old friend of Dad's. His voice was steady, but his eyes flickered with something I couldn't quite place. Guilt, maybe. He read through the will line by line. Mark straightened his tie, his leg bouncing impatiently while I just stared at the framed photo of Dad on the shelf behind the lawyer's desk. When Mr. Hargrove announced that Mark would inherit Dad's company, the warehouses, the trucks, the corporate office, Mark smirked, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Then came my turn. "To my son, Daniel," the lawyer said, glancing at me over his glasses. "I leave the family home and all its contents." There was a brief pause. Mark let out that laugh low. "Ood. Cruel, triumphant. You're kidding me. The house, that drafty old thing?" He turned to me. "Guess you'll be the neighborhood ghost now, huh? Living there alone?" I tried to smile, but it didn't reach my eyes. "It was his favorite place," I said quietly. Mark shrugged. "He probably thought you'd be too broke to afford rent anywhere else." Mr. Hargrove cleared his throat but didn't say a word, just slid 2 envelopes toward us, one for him, one for me, each marked to be opened in private. That's when I realized Dad wasn't finished talking to us. That evening, after the reading, I drove straight to the house. It looked smaller than I remembered. The paint had peeled in patches, ivy creeping up one side. The porch light flickered, like it wasn't sure whether to stay alive or not. When I opened the front door, the familiar scent hit me: cedar, dust, and a hint of Dad's aftershave. I stood there for a long moment, the wooden floor creaking softly under my shoes. It was quiet, too quiet. I made my way to the kitchen. The same chipped counter, the same wooden chairs that groaned when you sat down. Everything felt frozen in time. On the table, I placed the envelope. It was small, sealed carefully with Dad's handwriting on the front. "For Daniel when the noise fades." I don't know why, but I waited until the next morning to open it. Maybe I needed to sleep in the house one more night, hear the wind whistling through the window panes, feel close to him again before reading whatever final words he'd left me. That night I dreamt of him sitting on the porch, the same way he always did. Only this time, he was silent, just watching me. When I woke, the morning light spilled through the curtains, and I finally broke the seal. Inside there was a single letter, neatly folded, written in that firm, deliberate handwriting I knew so well. "Son, if you're reading this, then you already know what your brother received and what you did. I know it may not seem fair at first glance, but I've trusted each of you with what you're meant to handle. The business will test Mark's character, and yours, this house, will test your patience and heart. Everything I built began right here, within these walls. There are things inside this home that no one knows about, not even Mark. Take your time, look closely, you'll understand soon enough. Dad, I stared at the words, my heart pounding. There are things inside this home that no one knows about. It felt like the kind of sentence that changes everything. I looked around the room, the cracked tile, the worn-out curtains, the light flickering above the stove. Nothing looked out of the ordinary, yet there was a weight in the air, like the house itself was holding its breath. Over the next few days, Mark called a few times, mostly to brag. "Big week ahead, little brother," he said over the phone, his voice smooth with self-satisfaction. "The new investors are flying in. Dad's company is going international now. Can you believe it?" He'd be proud. I could hear the clinking of glasses in the background, laughter, music. He was already celebrating. "I'm sure he would," I said, though I didn't believe it. He laughed. "Don't let that old house eat you alive, Dan. Maybe when I'm done here, I'll buy you something better." That was the kind of man Mark had become, always chasing the next thing, never content. When I hung up, I sat in the quiet kitchen, my father's letter spread out before me. There was something about the phrasing, "look closely." I decided to start where everything began, the study, Dad's old sanctuary, the one room he always kept locked when he was alive. I found the key inside the drawer of his nightstand. It was small, brass, and warm to the touch, as if waiting for me. When I opened the door, the scent of aged paper and tobacco hit me like a wave. Sunlight filtered through the dusty window, casting golden stripes across shelves lined with books and ledgers. And that's when I noticed it. A strang. A seam in the floorboards, barely visible, running along the edge of the desk. The seam in the floor looked almost accidental, like something you wouldn't notice unless you were really searching for it. But once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. I knelt down, brushing my hand over the grain of the old oak. It wasn't loose, but the boards didn't line up perfectly either. One plank sat just a fraction higher than the rest. Dad was the kind of man who believed in craftsmanship. He never left things half done. So if there was an imperfection here, it was deliberate. I tapped the wood. It made a hollow sound. My pulse quickened. After a few minutes of feeling around, I found a small notch near the corner, just enough space to slip a flathead screwdriver under. The plank lifted with a groan. Beneath it, a shallow compartment. Inside was a small wooden box. It was dark mahogany, the corners smoothed from age, and there was a brass latch with a little bit of tarnish. I lifted it out carefully and set it on the desk. For a moment, I just stared at it. Dad wasn't a secretive man, but he was intentional. He didn't do anything without reason. Whatever this was, it mattered. When I opened the box, the hinges creaked softly. Inside was a stack of old letters, some sealed, some folded open. There were also several black and white photographs, Dad as a young man, standing in front of what looked like an empty lot with a shovel in his hand. Behind him, scrawled in faint handwriting, "Day 1 of the dream." Underneath the letters was a small, leather-bound journal. The moment I touched it, I knew. This was his handwriting, neat, blocky, steady. I turned to the first page. "If this house still stands when I'm gone, it's because the truth needs to stand with it." What we built, the company, the house, the legacy, it all started here. But not everyone remembers how it began. Not everyone deserves to. I felt a chill. For years, Mark had painted Dad's story as one of triumph, a rags to Aisha's tale of brilliance and hard work. But this sounded like something else. I read on, there were partners once, friends I trusted. But trust turns sour when money sweetens everything else. The business wasn't built by one man's hands. On a map, a simple floor plan of the house, certain spots were marked with tiny X's, and one of them was in the attic. By the time I climbed up there, the sky outside had gone gray. Dust motes swirled in the light from my flashlight. The attic smelled like cedar and old fabric. The boards creaked under my feet as I followed the map, counting steps just like the drawing said. I stopped in front of a large old trunk covered with a thick layer of dust, the same kind of trunk Dad used to keep his tools in when we were kids. I knelt down and unlatched it. Inside were old company documents, yellowed pages, faded ink, ledgers, balance sheets, signatures, and beneath those, a single envelope. On the front, in Dad's handwriting, for the lawyer, when the time comes. My breath caught. I knew then that Dad had planned something far bigger than I'd realized. The next morning, I called Mr. Hargrove and asked him to come to the house. He hesitated. "Is everything all right, Daniel? I think." I said slowly, "Dad left something for you." He arrived later that afternoon, his brow furrowed, his coat flapping in the wind. When I handed him the envelope, his face went pale. I thought he might have. "No," he murmured, shaking his head. I asked him years ago to reconsider this, but he wouldn't budge. "What is it?" I asked. He sighed, eyes downcast. "Something your brother won't want to hear." Meanwhile, Mark's voice was all over the news. The company had just landed a multi-million-dollar contract at least. That's what he told everyone. But something in the back of my mind told me that Dad's words were about to come true. That night, I found another voicemail from Mark. "Hey, Dan," he said, his tone sharp and irritated. "Heard you've been snooping around the old place. Whatever you think you're gonna find, don't. Dad gave me the business fair and square. You can keep the house and your nostalgia." He paused, then added, "Don't make this messy. That was always his way of saying, "Stay in your lane." When Mr. Hargrove returned 2 days later, he brought a briefcase and a weary look. "I opened the envelope," he said, sitting at the kitchen table where Dad and I used to eat breakfast together. "And Daniel, your father, he left instructions that affect both of you." I sat down slowly. "Go on." He opened the briefcase and took out a folder filled with papers, contracts, legal forms, and a handwritten note. "Your father anticipated this. The business and the house were split for a reason, but he also arranged a contingency, a condition." "A condition?" He nodded. "The company's ownership was never finalized under Mark's name. There's a clause 1 that allows for immediate review if questions of financial integrity arise." My heart skipped. "Meaning what?" He looked at me, his eyes heavy. "Meaning if the business is found to have been mismanaged or falsely represented within 1 year of your father's passing, ownership reverts to the secondary heir." I blinked. "You mean ye?" He said quietly. "You, Daniel." The words hung in the air. I leaned back, trying to take it in. Dad had set this up, the house, the clues, the letters, all of it. He'd known Mark would rush into the business blinded by pride, and he'd left me the key literally and figuratively to hold him accountable. "Mr. Hargrove," I said after a moment, "does Mark know about this?" He shook his head. "Not yet. And I suggest we wait before telling him. Your father's journal and those old records you found, they might be exactly what we need." I stared at the documents, my chest tight. It wasn't about revenge. It was about truth, the kind of truth Dad believed should outlive even him. Still, I couldn't help but think of Mark's laughter that day at the lawyer's office. The way he looked down on me, on the house, on everything I represented. Now I wondered what that laughter would sound like when he realized what the old house truly held. That night, I sat alone in the living room, the fire crackling so. I took out Dad's journal again, flipping to the last entry. "If you're reading this, son, know that I trusted you with what matters most, not money, not status, but legacy. A man's legacy is only as honest as the heart behind it. Protect it. Don't let greed rewrite it." I closed the book, the pages warm against my palms. Outside, the wind howled against the windows, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel forgotten. I felt ready, because somewhere between that laughter and the lawyer's envelope, my father had left me something far greater than an inheritance. He'd left me purpose. The next few weeks were a blur of quiet discovery. While Mark was parading across television interviews and shaking hands with investors, I stayed buried in the study, cataloging Dad's old files, tracing every detail of the company's beginnings. The ledgers told a story that numbers alone couldn't hide. There were discrepancies, small at first, then unmistakable. Funds wit. H drawn under unfamiliar names, consulting fees that didn't align with any legitimate project. It wasn't Dad's handwriting on those signatures. It was Mark's. At first I wanted to believe it was a mistake, maybe something I was misreading in my grief. But the deeper I looked, the clearer it became. Mark wasn't just managing Dad's company. He was draining it. I remember the night I realized the full scope of it. I had spread the papers across the dining table, the same one Dad built with his own hands. The smell of wood polish lingered faintly, mixing with the scent of coffee gone cold. Outside, rain drummed against the window. My eyes burned from hours of reading, but I couldn't stop. Each transaction, each forged signature, each payment to shell companies, all pointing to one truth: Mark had been preparing to sell off pieces of the company before Dad even passed. The worst part? He'd hidden it behind Dad's illness. While I was helping Dad with his therapy, Mark was drawing up company tracks that cut Dad's name from his own legacy. It wasn't just greed, it was betrayal, and somewhere, deep in my chest, something broke. When I finally called Mr. Hargrove, my voice was shaking. "I found it," I said. "Found what?" "The proof." He came to the house the next morning, his coat soaked from the rain, his briefcase heavy with purpose. I laid out everything: the ledgers, the journal, the letters, the maps. He moved slowly, scanning the pages like each one carried the weight of a confession. After an hour of silence, he closed the last ledger and leaned back. "Your father knew," he said. "He must have suspected Mark was planning this." I nodded. "He wanted me to find it." "Yes," he said, his voice quiet but certain. "And now, Daniel, the question is, what do you want to do with it?" I didn't answer right away. There's something about realizing your own brother has betrayed the man who raised you. It's not anger that hits first, it's sadness. A deep, soul-sinking sadness that sits heavy in your stomach and whispers, "Was I ever enough for him to love?" I thought about all the times Mark and I had fought as kids over toys, over attention, over the dinner table. Dad always said, "One day you boys will need each other more than you know." And now here we were, standing on opposite ends of everything Dad built. I told Mr. Hargrove I needed time to think. He agreed, but reminded me, "If this goes public, Daniel, it'll be messy. The company's reputation, your brother's career, your family's name, it'll all be dragged through the mud. Are you ready for that?" I wasn't sure. But I knew one thing: Dad's name didn't deserve to be buried under Mark's lies. That night, I drove to the company headquarters, the sleek glass building Mark had renovated last year. I parked across the street, watching through the rain-streaked windshield as lights glowed from the top floor. His office. I could see his silhouette pacing, gesturing, phone in hand. The picture of success, a strange LM came over me. It was time to talk to him face to face. He didn't expect me when I walked into his office the next morning. His assistant gave me a polite but uncertain smile as I entered without waiting for permission. Mark was standing behind his desk, signing papers, his cufflinks gleaming in the morning light. "Well, look who decided to leave the haunted mansion," he said with a smirk. "What brings you here, little brother? Need a loan?" I didn't rise to it. "We need to talk about what? Dad's house? You find another hidden cat under the floorboards?" I placed a folder on his desk. The sound echoed through the room. He frowned. "What's this?" "Proof," I said quietly. "That you've been funneling company money into your own accounts. That you started selling Dad's legacy before he even died." For a second his smirk faltered. Then it came back sharper. "You've been reading his old junk again, haven't you? Daniel, you always were dramatic. You think you can walk in here with a bunch of papers and—" "Don't," I said, cutting him off. My voice was steady, but my hands were trembling. "Don't lie to me, Mark. Not this time. I've got every transaction, every signature. I have Dad's journal." He knew. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Mark's face changed from arrogance to irritation, then to something colder. He stepped closer. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I know exactly what I'm talking about," I said. "And so will the lawyer. So will the board." He exhaled sharply through his nose, a forced laugh escaping. "You think anyone's going to believe you over me? I'm the one running this company, Dan. You're just the quiet one who paints pictures in Dad's old house. Who's going to listen to you?" I held his gaze. "Dad will—" For a second he looked startled, then his jaw clenched. "He's gone?" I leaned closer. "Maybe. But his words aren't." When I left the building, I felt something shift inside me, like I had stepped out from under a shadow that had followed me my whole life. I didn't need to scream or threaten. The truth was already louder than either of us. That evening, Mr. Hargrove called. He had begun the process of reviewing the company's financial records with the board. Quietly, carefully. Mark didn't know it yet, but the ground beneath him was already cracking. A week later, I received an invitation to the company's annual gala, a formal event where Mark planned to announce a major expansion. At first, I wasn't going to go, but then I thought of Dad. Of the journal, the letter, the promise he left behind, and I realized this was exactly where I needed to be. The night of the gala, the ballroom was alive with music and champagne laughter. The chandeliers cast golden light over hundreds of faces: investors, employees, family, friends. Mark was in his element, shaking hands, flashing smiles, making grand speeches. When he spotted me, his expression tightened for just a moment. Then he raised his glass. "Everyone, my broth. Daniel is here tonight. He got the old house, but his family always will be." A few people laughed politely. I smiled. Thanks for the warm welcome. But beneath the surface, something electric hummed in the air. Mr. Hargrove stood at the back of the room, a folder in his hands. When Mark stepped up to the microphone, ready to announce his new deal, the lawyer caught my eye, a silent signal. It was time. Mr. Hargrove cleared his throat and spoke before Mark could begin. His voice carried through the hall. "Before tonight's announcements, I have a statement to read from the late Mr. Robert Parker." Every head turned. Mark froze. "What?" the lawyer continued. "As executor of his estate, I am obligated to disclose recent findings pertaining to the ownership and management of Parker Logistics." Whispers rippled through the crowd. And for the first time, Mark looked afraid. Mark's confident smile faltered as the lawyer's voice filled the ballroom. Mr. Hargrove spoke slowly, each word deliberate, every sentence sinking into the thick silence like a stone dropped in deep water. "It has come to light," he said, "that before his passing, Mr. Robert Parker left behind supplementary documentation regarding the rightful ownership and management of Parker Logistics." I could hear the faint clink of glasses being set down, murmurs starting up from the crowd. "Per Mr. Parker's instructions," Hargrove continued, "should any question arise concerning the ethical or financial integrity of the company's operations within 1 year of his death, all proprietary rights are to revert to the secondary heir, Daniel Parker." The room went dead quiet. Mark's face went pale. He laughed, a hollow, desperate sound. "This is ridiculous. You can't just read something like that in public. This is my company." Hargrove didn't even flinch. He held up a second folder, thick, bound with evidence. Mr. Parker also instructed that any such review be accompanied by documentation of irregularities if found. These documents were submitted this week, containing records of financial misconduct under your authorization. A sharp gasp broke through the room. Someone dropped their glass. And Mark took a step back, his expression shifting from disbelief to fury. "Daniel," he snapped, his voice low but trembling with anger. "What did you do?" "I didn't move. I found what Dad left behind. You did the rest." He pointed a shaking finger at me. "You had no right to go through his things. None." I met his eyes, calm. "He left them for me, for this." Mark's jaw tightened. "You think anyone's going to believe this nonsense? I've run this company for years. People trust me." Mr. Hargrove stepped forward, placing the files on the podium. "Then I'm sure they'll be glad to hear you explain these transactions, the ones routed through offshore accounts in your name." A ripple of whispers spread like wildfire through the crowd. Mark's lips parted, but no words came out. He turned, scanning the room. His investors, his employees, people who had built their careers under his watch. And one by one, I saw their faces change. Trust draining away, replaced by something colder. Disbelief. Disgust. The board chair, an older woman with silver hair and sharp eyes, stood up from her table. "Mr. Parker," she said, her voice cutting clean through the murmurs, "is this true?" Mark swallowed hard. It's not what it looks like." Her expression didn't waver. "Then tell us what it is." But he couldn't. His silence said more than any confession ever could. When the night ended, security escorted Mark out the back doors, away from the press already gathering outside. The board met in private with Hargrove and me, their expressions grim but respectful. They voted unanimously to suspend Mark from all executive duties pending investigation. I didn't celebrate. There was no satisfaction in watching my brother fall. Only a kind of quiet sorrow, the kind that comes when you realize the person you love. "D has burned their own bridge and still blames you for the ashes." The next morning, the newspapers ran the headline, "CEO under investigation. Parker Logistics faces financial scandal." I sat at the kitchen table in the old house, the same paper spread out beside my coffee mug. The words didn't bring joy. Just wait. I thought about calling him. Then I didn't, because what could I possibly say that would reach him now? It was 3 days before he showed up at the house. I was sanding down one of the porch railings trying to make sense of life after the storm, when his black sedan pulled up to the curb. He got out slowly, wearing a wrinkled shirt, his eyes shadowed and tired. For a moment he just stood there, looking at the house, the one he'd mocked, the one he said should have been torn down. "Dad's house," he murmured. "Never thought I'd see you actually fixing it up." I wiped my hands on my jeans. "It's more than a house now." He gave a short, humorless laugh. "Yeah, seems like We stood there in awkward silence, the autumn wind carrying the faint scent of pine and earth. Finally, he said, "You didn't have to humiliate me like that, you know." I looked at him. "I didn't humiliate you, Mark. You did that yourself." His jaw flexed. "I built that company. I worked every damn day to make it what it is, and you tore it down with greed," I said softly. "Dad warned us about that." He looked away, blinking hard. "You always thought you were better than me, didn't you?" "No," I said. "I just thought you'd remember who we were before all this." He didn't answer. Instead, he stepped onto the porch, glancing around like he was seeing it for the first time. His eyes landed on the old rocking chair, Dad's chair, sitting beside the window. "I used to hate that sound," he said, nodding at it. "That creaking drove me crazy when Dad rocked in it for hours." I smiled faintly. It kept him calm. Mark's gaze softened for just a second. He used to tell me that patience wasn't weakness. I didn't understand it then. He exhaled, his voice cracking. "Guess I still don't." For the first time in years, I saw something real in his face, not arrogance, not pride, just regret. He turned toward me. "What happens now?" "The board will decide," I said. "Hargrove thinks they'll appoint someone interim until the audit's done. You might face charges." He nodded, jaw tight. "Figures." There was a long silence before he added, "Dad really left it all to you, huh? The house, the truth." I looked down. "He left us both something. You just didn't want yours." He frowned. "What do you mean?" "Responsibility," I said. "Table." The creak of the wood, the hum of the crickets outside it all felt like him again. I whispered, "You were right, Dad, about everything." And maybe it was just the wind, but I could swear the house itself sighed back. A few weeks later, I got a call from Mr. Hargrove. "The board has finished their review," he said. "They've decided to reinstate the company under new management." I swallowed. "Who?" "You," he said simply. "Per your father's clause." My breath caught. "I never wanted to run the company." "I know," he said, "but maybe that's exactly why you should." That evening, I drove to the headquarters again, the same glass building, but it felt different now, less intimidating, more human somehow. As I walked through the doors, employees stopped to greet me, not with the forced smiles they used to give Mark, but with genuine warmth. I spent the next few days quietly learning the ropes, reading reports, meeting department heads. I wasn't trying to replace Dad. I was trying to restore him, his way, his values, his heart. And every night I'd come home to the old house, where it all began. A few months later, I got a letter in the mail, no return address. Just my name in shaky handwriting, inside a single line. "I'm sorry, M." I read it once, twice, and tucked it into Dad's journal. Maybe one day, forgiveness would come easily. But for now, it was enough that he'd finally said the words. That old house, the one everyone thought was worthless, had turned out to be the key to everything. It gave me back my father. It gave me back the truth. And in a strange, bittersweet way, it even gave me back my brother. I never did see Mark again after that day in the lawyer's office. Not properly, at least. He sent one short message months later, just a line that said, "I messed up, Danny." I know. It came at 3:12 in the morning, the kind of hour when regret breathes loudest. I didn't reply, not because I wanted to be cruel, but because there was nothing left to say that could fix what had been undone. The house, that creaking, leaning, whispering house, became mine in every sense. I sanded down the banister, painted the porch rail white again, and planted marigolds along the fence like my mother used to. It was quiet work, honest work. And when the wind passed through the cracked windows, it carried something like forgiveness in it. Some nights, I'd sit in the kitchen with a cup of coffee gone cold, staring at the same spot where Dad once read his newspaper. The sound of his spoon against the mug, the smell of black coffee and wood polish, they lingered like a memory that didn't want to fade. I used to think the inheritance was about what we got: money, property, titles. But sitting there, I realized it was about what we carried. The lessons, the decency, the kind of dignity that doesn't make headlines but keeps a person upright when the world leans sideways. Dad had left the old house to me not because it was worth less, but because he trusted me to keep something sacred alive. And now finally I understood that. A year passed, seasons peeled away like pages from an old calendar. Mark's business went under. The lawyer told me, quietly, that he'd sold off the company assets to cover debts. There was talk of betrayal within his own staff, lawsuits, broken contracts. I didn't feel joy in that, just a deep, hollow sadness, because I knew what it meant to lose not just money but the story your pride told you about yourself. One morning I got a call. It was the hospital in the next county. Mark had been admitted: dehydration, exhaustion, nothing fatal. He'd burned himself out trying to keep his reputation alive. The nurse said he'd listed me as his emergency contact. I remember sitting there, phone pressed to my ear, hearing her voice echo through that empty kitchen. It would have been easy to say no, to hang up, walk away, pretend the blood between us had dried to nothing, but I didn't. When I got to his hospital room, he looked small. Blur somehow. His once polished hair had gone gray at the edges, and his hands, those same hands that used to slap my back in brotherly pride, trembled as he reached for his water cup. He blinked up at me, uncertain. "You came?" I nodded, pulled the chair closer. "You're still my brother, Mark." His lip trembled. He looked away. "I don't deserve that." I didn't disagree, but I also didn't leave. I sat there for hours, listening to the machine's hum. He didn't apologize, not really. He just kept saying, "Dad trusted me, and I failed him." I wanted to tell him the truth, that Dad had trusted both of us in different ways. One to preserve the legacy, the other to preserve the home. But I didn't. Some lessons you let time whisper on its own. When he was discharged, he went to live with an old friend downstate. We spoke a few more times, short calls, careful silences between us. Then eventually, even that stopped. Back at the house, I kept finding small traces of the life that had built me. A fought. Oh, tucked inside a drawer, Dad holding Mark and me on the fishing dock, the sunset bleeding gold across the water. A note in Mom's handwriting: "Keep your heart soft, Danny. The world will try to harden it." That one stayed pinned on the fridge. I started opening the old place up to the neighborhood. Saturday mornings, kids would come help with the garden, and I'd tell them stories about the man who used to live here, about a father who worked with calloused hands and taught his sons how to build, not just profit. The house became more than just inheritance. It became community again. Laughter filled the halls that once echoed with argument. And though I never saw Mark there, sometimes I'd catch a glimpse of a car slowing outside the gate. A dark sedan, same make he used to drive. It never stopped, but I'd feel it, that familiar presence, hovering just beyond the fence line. Maybe it was him, maybe not. But I like to think he saw the house once more, standing proud and alive, and knew I kept my promise. One evening, after pruning the marigolds, I sat on the porch with the sun dipping low. The light brushed across the chipped paint, and the cicadas started their chorus. It felt peaceful, not perfect, not healed in every sense, but enough. I thought of Dad then, of how he used to say, "Fairness isn't always equal, son. Sometimes it's about giving each man what he needs, not what he wants." Mark needed to learn the cost of pride, and I needed to learn the strength in letting go. As twilight fell, I whispered a quiet prayer for my brother, that wherever he was, he'd find a small place of his own to rebuild, just as I had, and then, for the first time in years, I didn't feel angry anymore. Just light. The kind of light that comes when you finally stop carrying what isn't yours to hold. You know, when I look back now, it's strange how quiet the house feels, not lonely, just still. Like it's finally resting after too many years of being pulled between brothers, and pride and peace. Sometimes I sit by that old window, the one that sticks when it rains, and I think about all the things we inherit that don't come in envelopes. We inherit tempers. We inherit habits. We inherit the way our parents loved us and the way they didn't know how. Mark got Dad's business, but he also got Dad's hunger to prove himself. I got the house and all the memories that came with it, and maybe that's what Dad saw coming long before we did. It took me a long time to understand that fairness isn't about dividing things evenly, it's about placing trust where it can grow. My father trusted that I'd keep something sacred alive, and in my own quiet way, I did. Now the garden blooms again every spring. The fence is still old, still uneven in places, but children lean over it and wave as they pass. Their laughter fills the same space where Mark and I once fought, and sometimes I swear, if I close my eyes, I can almost hear Dad's voice again, calm, proud, saying, "That's my boys." Maybe this is what peace looks like. Not perfect endings or tearful reconciliations, but small acts of grace, the kind you don't announce, just live. So if you're listening tonight, wondering why life gave you less while someone else got more, I want you to remember this. Sometimes, what looks like the smaller portion is the one that saves you, because money fades, businesses crumble. But a heart that learns forgiveness, that's the kind of inheritance no lawyer can write down. And if you ever find yourself holding something old, something others mocked or threw away, maybe an old house, maybe just a memory, don't let shame make you discard it. You never know what kind of healing might be waiting in the quiet of what you've been left to tend. As for me, every evening when I lock the front door and the sun dips behind the sycamores, I whisper the same words I once heard my mother say when life got heavy. Let what's meant for you stay. Let what isn't go. And somehow that's enough. Tell me, if you were in my place, if your own brother mocked what you were given, would you have still chosen forgiveness? Or would you have let pride answer for you? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story touched you in some small way, take a moment to like, share, and subscribe, not just to the channel, but to the idea that kindness, even after betrayal, can still find its way home. Because in the end, every house, every heart, deserves a little bit of peace.